Some people are reading the president's remark as really pointing to regime change. Is that overreading what he's saying?
I think it is overreading it. What I heard was more, let's focus on isolating Iran in a way that stops them from taking the external actions, both in the region and beyond, that are threatening to both regional and world peace.
So I misspoke earlier. You corrected me. You actually met with President Rouhani of Iran with a group of other people the night before these remarks rather than the night after them. From what you've seen from President Rouhani, from what your intelligence, as it were, tells you, are we making progress diplomatically with Iran? Are they budging at all?
I don't think there's progress on either side at this point, David. It seems to me that each side is stating their opening positions for a dialogue that may come. Rouhani had a piece in the Washington Post, an editorial, where he laid out Iran's positions. I think President Trump was quite clear yesterday as well as today. I think it is now incumbent on both sides to try to find a way, working with European allies and others, to get into a dialogue about that range of issues that the U.S. has laid out and give Iran the opportunity to respond, as President Rouhani did sort of unilaterally. I think they now need to get into bilateral and multilateral discussions.
So talking about bilateral and even multilateral, give us a sense of the institution of the United Nations and what role it plays here. President Trump has made no secret of the fact he likes to act bilaterally, and yet he goes to the UN and gives a speech like this. Who's his audience? What is he trying to accomplish there?
Well, today I heard him say that we approach our efforts with sovereignty and cooperation. So he's saying that the U.S. and everyone has to come in to advance their sovereign interests, but we're looking for ways to cooperate. And you're right. I think his personal style from 50 years in business is to deal bilaterally with a single party across the table. And yet the U.S. has used the United Nations very effectively, including adding additional sanctions last year on North Korea. And look where we are now on North Korea, engaged in talks. Secretary Pompeo reported that he had good discussions with the North Korean foreign minister. And so I think if you take a look at the fact that President Trump is spending as much time at the UN as any president ever has, 3, almost 4 days, including chairing the Security Council session, I think what he's saying is let's use multilateral institutions when they are effective in helping to advance U.S. and other countries' sovereign interests.
So it is ironic a little bit that the way we made progress on North Korea, if we do agree that there was progress made, was multilaterally. We had to have other people join with us through the United Nations. Is it likely that the Europeans particularly will hold with us in the new Iranian sanctions? Because that is critical to putting pressure on Iran.
I think the Europeans have made clear that they are not with us on the sanctions question at this point. They want us to come back and recognize the JCPOA and then discuss other issues, proliferation, regional instability, above and beyond that. I think the U.S. has made clear, President Trump couldn't have been clearer today, that these sanctions are going to go into effect on the 1st of November. Companies are going to have to choose between doing business in Iran or the United States. I think it's pretty clear what choice they're going to make. So sanctions are most effective when you have a multilateral basis. That's why we started putting sanctions in place against Iran in 2006 in the Bush 43 administration. Same thing on North Korea. You always prefer a multilateral approach, but you cannot abdicate your responsibilities to protect the United States from threats.
So finally, I'd love a thought from you, Bob, if you would, on Angela Merkel, somebody whom you know well from your time over in Germany going way back. She is having a tough time of it. She had a tough time putting that coalition together. She's had a problem with a domestic intelligence chief. And now she tried to get her own candidate to run the caucus for the CDU in the Bundestag. Is she in trouble?
I don't think she's in trouble. But if you take a look at right of center politicians throughout Europe, even centrist politicians throughout Europe, they're being very much buffeted by the populist winds of both the right and the left. I think Mrs. Merkel will work her way through this. As she said yesterday, in politics, sometimes you lose some. She has now a party colleague, Rolf Brinkhaus, someone who knows this country well from quite a bit of work that he's done with the American Council on Germany, as her party leader on the floor. I think right now there's really not much of an alternative for Mrs. Merkel and her grand coalition partners, the SPD, because all the polls indicate that if there were new elections, you would see the parties of the extreme right and left begin to pick up more and more votes. So I think Mrs. Merkel feels that she has an obligation, even with these buffeting winds, to try to persevere.